Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I stayed when the evacuation order went out because it was my job to walk the drainage map after storms and make sure the stations that had survived were ready to move water. I knew the levee lines, the pump houses, the old brick culverts nobody thought about until a street turned into a canal. My name is Eli Dupré. I'm 36, and before the city cut the contract years back, I did structural inspections for the Army Corps. When the hurricane crossed the lake and hammered us, I spent the night at a small office near North Rampart, with a rolled-up set of as-built drawings, a pair of rubber boots, and a battery lantern sitting on a stack of wet maps. Wind howled against the door like a freight train. The radio on my desk kept describing torn roofs and a barge that had broken loose and scraped a floodwall near the Industrial Canal. Sometime near dawn, the eye passed, the pressure rose, and the building stopped flexing. The world went quiet in that eerie way after a storm, when you hear only dripping and the occasional pop of a transformer far away. When daylight came, I pulled the plywood off the door and stepped out. The city looked like it had been put under glass. Water stood knee-deep along Rampart, and the intersections were deeper. The quarter had shallow stretches and sudden holes where cars had become invisible islands. You smelled river mud, diesel, and something sour from broken coolers. I took our aluminum John boat off the trailer, slid it down the loading ramp, and used a long push-pole to keep away from the submerged cars and street signs. The outboard was a small four-stroke we service ourselves. I didn't want to risk sucking in debris on the first day, so I poled more than I motored. The phone network was a mess. Sending a message felt like dropping a note into the river. I kept the radio on VHF channel 16, listening for any chat from boats or the Coast Guard. I also kept a handheld tuned to the local weather feed in the city's Public Works channel. The calls started as requests for help off rooftops and parking garage ramps. Then the first strange reports arrived. Someone at a clinic across Esplanade said an unconscious flood victim had become violent without warning. Another voice said the same thing from a shelter near St. Claude. Dispatchers used vague language. Medical incidents, agitation, self-harm risks. I had been through ugly storms. I thought I understood shock and panic. I told myself it was that. I moved along Basin Street towards Esplanade Avenue because the hospital there sat only a little higher than the surrounding blocks, and I wanted to check if their emergency generator stacks were clear. Sirens drifted in and out with the wind gusts that still moved through the city hours after the worst had passed. On Esplanade, I saw the first thing I couldn't explain. A man in a soaked shirt climbed onto the trunk of a sedan that barely stuck out of the brown water. He moved like he had no balance, arms at his sides, head slightly tilted. A woman on a balcony above him shouted down that she would call for help. The man tipped forward, slid off the trunk, and vanished. I pushed the boat closer, thinking I might reach him with the pole. Then he came up beside my hull with both hands open. His eyes were unfocused, and his mouth worked without making sound. He grabbed the gunwale like a climber who had trained for it, not like someone struggling. I shoved the pole down, levered him off, and he drifted on, bumping a parked motorcycle and rolling onto his back. His chest rose. I told myself he was in shock, that he would come around, that someone nearer could help. I kept moving. The hospital entrance was a sheet of water. Wheelchairs floated. A yellow generator cable had been run up the stairs and through a window to the second floor. On the steps I found a woman in green scrubs, soaked to the elbows, with a backpack that looked too heavy. She kept her hair under a cap, and her voice was steady. "You with the city?" she asked. "Inspection," I said. "Drainage and pump stations." I'm trying to map a path to the Claiborne drainage line. I offered the boat. You getting out? Not alone, she said. We've got a few left inside. I'm Renee. Tulane Medical. She looked behind me at the empty street that had become a channel. Your boat looks like the only ride going east. We shuttled 3 staff members across to a brick stoop where it was dry enough to sit. 2 of them took off toward a taller building to flag down a larger craft. Renee stayed. The generator failed, she said quietly. The backup battery bank was flooded. We moved who we could to the 2nd floor and got IV fluids off the shelf. Then the people we thought were gone started moving again. No pulse, no breath, moving. I looked at her face to see if she was testing me. I pushed a guy off my boat a few blocks back, I said. He climbed like he'd been doing it all day. She nodded. We kept the doors closed after that. They kept coming, in the water. There are more around the corner, drifting. Don't let them touch your hands. We made Dauphine Street our temporary base because a restaurant there had a 2nd floor balcony with a narrow exterior stair and a window above the water line. I pulled us under the ironwork balconies, hooking the rail to hold position while we hauled supplies through. Inside were candles, wine, an empty cash drawer, and a grease smell that never goes away in kitchens. I locked the back door with a bar against the frame and marked the street with spray paint. Too safe. Food inside. Leave note. On the roof, you could see beyond Bourbon to the river, a white line of light where clouds were breaking and the sun threw reflections off standing water. It looked like a lake had been poured on the city. That afternoon, I met Marcus Parker, known as Slim to almost everyone. He came up Chartres in an airboat, the prop wash pushing floating trash to the sides. He wore ear protection around his neck and had a plywood rack welded to the bow for a cooler and gear. He cut the engine to glide and then brought the nose up so that the keel tapped the stairs. "Anybody need a lift?" he said, voice rough with tiredness. Then he saw Renee and me, and relief knotted his shoulders. "I'm looking for my cousin," he said. "Lives up in Bywater. Took an airboat out of Woodland when the road went under. You seen anyone waving a white shirt from a chimney?" "Not yet," I said. "But I need to reach a pump station near Claiborne. If we get it going, this whole section could drop by a foot or 2. That opens streets. It makes everything easier." He tilted his head. "You know the manuals?" "I wrote some of the inspection checklists," I said. "And I know what to look for in a flooded panel. We'll need parts and a safe perimeter." Slim looked around at the drift of bodies that bumped now and then against the airboat's hull. Some were still. Some moved without a pattern. "You see them float up," he said. "Look asleep until you get close. Then they wake like they heard their names. Folks call them floaters. I've been pushing them off with a gaff." He reached behind the seat and set an 8-foot aluminum pole with a blunt hook on the deck. "You keep them off the deck and off your hands," he said. "That's the rule." We agreed to work together. Renee packed gauze, saline, a stethoscope, a small kit for stitches and tape, and a few bottles of antibiotics we might need if we took a cut in that water. I brought a canvas bag with nitrile gloves, a Leatherman, hand sanitizer, and the laminated station diagrams. In the back of the restaurant kitchen, we found a 5-gallon bucket of pool shock granules and used it to treat rainwater caught in pans and basins on the roof. We rigged a gutter into clean containers with cut hose, bandanas, and zip ties. I wrote on the stair wall, "Rainwater only. Do not drink floodwater." We moved before dusk. Slim ran the airboat slow through the quarter, past street lamps bent by the wind, and balcony ironwork, slick with the brown film. The sound of the engine carried. Heads rose from water. The floaters turned, hands moving like they were swimming uphill. They drifted with the wash and tried to grip the deck. We used the gaff and long poles to push them off. The ones that touched the hull left streaks. On St. Claude Avenue, a small skiff shot out of a side street. 2 men paddling hard, one with a rifle laid across his knees. They saw the airboat and angled toward us. Slim pulled back to idle and lifted one hand. The man in front lifted his rifle in reply. "We're headed for Claiborne," I shouted. "Pump station." The man nodded once. "Looters thick down by Royal," he said. "Folks firing off roofs. Watch your corners." We passed a grocery store with its windows broken. Cartons floated from the aisles and out the door. The smell of meat gone bad curled across the water. On Esplanade, a woman waved a white towel from a second-floor window, a child next to her. We slowed and handed up bottled water and a bag of granola bars, then marked the building's doorframe with a charcoal line so we could find it again. Renee wrote, "To here. Need meds for asthma," on the paint with a waterproof marker. We told them to keep quiet at night and to tie a pot on a string with a spoon inside to make a clatter if they needed help. The woman thanked us in a voice that was too calm. She had been calm for too long. Near the Claiborne overpass, the water deepened. The Industrial Canal to our east had overtopped a section near the north end. You could see the high line of scum on concrete like a ring in a bathtub. The pump station we aimed for sat in a low square building with a roll-up door and a small office attached. Its brickwork was older than most. The station had been modernized inside, but the bones were early 20th century. I had inspected it 3 times in my life and had never seen a day when someone didn't leave a coffee ring on the control desk. We tied the airboat to a handrail on the station's roof access and used a bolt cutter on the rusted hasp. Inside, water stood halfway up the wall. The control cabinets were submerged except for the top rows of indicator lights, which showed the same dead red as everything else in the city. A diesel generator on a raised platform had been flooded from below. The exhaust stack had taken rain, and the intake was a mess. The smell in that room told me the oil had mixed with water. "Not a quick fix," I said. "We'll need a portable generator to run the panels and the pump motors one by one. And we'll need to flush the switchgear with clean water and alcohol, then dry it. Or we bypass the station's controls and run a single pump manually." Toby found us later that evening on Dauphine when we came back to regroup and eat something that didn't need cooking. He was a rangy kid with a tool roll across his chest, grease on his hands, and a look like he had skipped the stage where you shake after a scare. "You, Eli?" he said. "The neighbors said you were the one with station keys." He explained that he had been trying to power a small generator at his apartment near Elysian Fields to run a fan and light for his mom, but by the time he got it together, she was gone. He said the word "gone" like it covered all possibilities at once. He had been moving since, fixing things to not sit still. "You any good with small engines?" Slim asked. Toby shrugged without false modesty. "I can make a mower run on paint thinner if you don't mind it coughing," he said. "I can strip and clean carbs, swap plugs, and wire a transfer switch if we got the right gauge. I can do battery banks too, my dad taught me." Renee listened and said, "If you're coming with us, we follow rules. Gloves on in the water. Don't touch your face. If anyone gets cut, we get out and clean it. We don't bring anyone on board who we don't know until we can hold them separate." "Copy," he said. "I'll stay by the motor." The next morning, we made a supply plan. A portable diesel generator big enough to run station controls and at least one pump, electrical cleaner, rags, isopropyl alcohol, fresh engine oil, and diesel. We'd also need floodlights to see the yard and the approach, plus flares to draw floaters away. There was a hardware store on North Claiborne that might have what we needed if it hadn't been stripped. A contractor's yard behind it stored temporary light towers that ran on diesel. I wrote the list in pencil on a dry section of cardboard, and we taped it to the airboat's console. On the way, we passed more signs that the city was changing by the hour. People had tied ladders between balconies to move without touching the water. Bicycles were used like mules, their rear racks carrying cases of food from one high doorway to another. A man stood on a rooftop with a marine VHF and read names into the air. People looking for people. The radio stations we could reach went silent one by one. Then an AM station out of Baton Rouge came through with a looped message that used the word OUTBREAK and a list of instructions. I felt my grip tighten on the push-pole as if I could push the whole city forward by will. We found the contractor yard fence down and the yard itself half underwater. 2 light towers lay on their sides like toppled trees. One still stood, its wheels half submerged and the generator compartment above waterline. We waited with gloves and boots and checked for fuel. The tank read 1/4. The oil looked clean. The battery showed charge. Toby climbed onto the frame and pulled the access panel while Slim and I hauled a heavy extension cord through the current. Renee kept watch with the gaff. The first time Toby hit the ignition, the engine coughed and died. He bled the fuel line, cleaned the filter with alcohol, and tried again. This time, the engine smoothed out into a steady note. He grinned with one corner of his mouth, as if grinning all the way would be bad luck. We hitched the light tower to the airboat with a tow strap. Moving it through the water took more power than Slim liked to give, but the prop pushed a path, and soon we turned into the station yard. I wanted to climb onto the roof and scout before we entered. The flood had carried vehicles into a loose barricade near the gate. Trash cans, a plastic playhouse, a delivery van sideways in the entrance like it had been pushed there on purpose. We cut a gap with a handsaw and the tow strap. The airboat's prop wash rattled the loose chain link and sent floats and bottles skittering across the surface. We positioned the light tower on a concrete pad and raised the mast. The lamps threw a white flood across the water and the face of the station building. That sound and light brought movement. At first, it was 3 or 4 heads bumping against the curb. Then it was more, drawn by the engine. They drifted from the shadow of the overpass and the side streets. Slim gunned the engine twice to draw them away while Renee and I moved inside. I told her where to stand to hold the flashlight on the control panel while I worked. Toby came in with an armful of rags, the spray cleaner, and a heat gun we could run off the generator once we had power to the room. I shut the station's main breaker and looked for points where we could bypass a dead relay. The pump motors sat in their own bay with shafts that led out to the intake screens. These were big pumps for a small station, enough to drop the quarter a few inches over hours if they ran without interruption. The control logic would never like what I was about to do, but we didn't need perfect. We needed moving water. Toby set up a box fan and ran its cord back to the light tower's auxiliary outlet. Air moved in the room for the first time since the storm. He aimed the heat gun at the driest part of the cabinet and kept it moving. I eased open the panel that housed the start contactor for Pump 2. The coils were wet, but not drowned. The terminal screws still shone. I sprayed cleaner, wiped with alcohol, and waited. The station smelled like a shop and a dock at once. Outside, Slim fired 2 flares. The red light threw long shadows of bodies drifting at the fence. When I was as ready as I was going to get, I looked at Renee. "If this trip's a fault and arcs," I said, "you throw the main on the light tower. We don't want a fire in here." "I've got it," she said, voice steady as ever. I made the connection with an insulated jumper, closed the housing, and hit the start. The motor whined and then found rhythm. The whole building changed its note as the shaft turned. The intake produced a low thunder you could feel in your ribs. Water began to move through channels that had been still for too long, and in the yard you could see the surface start to pull. The floaters slewed toward the intake grates and hung there, pressed by force they couldn't understand. Slim came in, eyes bright behind his sweat. "You did it," he said. "You really did it." "Pump 2 is running," I said. "If it holds for an hour, I try 1. Then we take turns sleeping in shifts. We can't let that generator die or we lose everything we just started." He nodded. "I'll sit the first watch. Ren, you want a nap? You take my coat. Toby, check the fuel. We burn more than we think." As night closed, the light tower's lamps became a beacon that drew more than water. People on a high balcony nearby waved with both arms. A man called out that his mother needed help and could we come. Renee went to the roof and spoke to him across the gap. "We can't open the door tonight," she said gently. "In the morning, when the water drops, we come get you. You'll hear the engine. If anyone is fevered, keep them in a separate room with the door closed. Do not open the window to the street. We'll come to the back." Overnight, we learned the other rule of the flood. Sound carries in straight lines over water, and anything that hears you will try to come. Slim stayed topside with the Remington shotgun across his lap, loaded with buckshot but pointed down. He didn't fire unless a floater took hold in a way a pole couldn't break. He preferred the gaff, quick and quiet. He let me sleep for 2 hours in a chair near the control panel. Renee slept too, one hand under her cheek and the other wrapped around a flashlight. Toby cat-napped on the floor near the generator door, waking at every change in engine note. Around midnight, the station shook with a deep thud. For a moment, I thought we had lost a bearing. Then another thud. Slim shouted down that a car had drifted into the intake fence and wedged. The water pressure forced it against the grates and the floaters piled behind it. We needed to clear it, or we would choke the pump and burn the motor. I pulled on gloves and a life vest, clipped a tether line to the belt, and climbed onto the catwalk. The car's roof made a small island near the grates. I could see inside the back seat through the muddy glass. The shapes there didn't move. I flattened myself against the railing and inched the gaff toward the bumper. Slim took the other pole. Together we levered. The car shifted an inch, then 2. Water roared through the new gap. The pressure difference turned the car as if a hand had grabbed it from below, and it rolled away, bumping along the fence. The bodies that had clung to it spun once and then slid under. I told myself they were gone in the sense a current can take you to another place. Before dawn, the water line on the station wall showed a drop of 3 inches. It wasn't much, but in a city with shallow gradients, 3 inches turns a doorway from a lake into a step. It turns a trapped person into someone who can walk out with help. The flood in the street had visibly pulled away from the curb into a slow current. When the sky lightened, we shut down Pump 2 for 10 minutes to check temperature, oil, and any signs of stress. The bearings were warm but not alarming. We restarted and tried Pump 1. Its contactor crackled at first, then settled. With both pumps running, the yard pulled like a river bend. The light tower's fuel gauge dipped. Toby siphoned diesel from a parked delivery truck into the tower's tank. He did it with a clear hose and the patience of someone who had filled a lawn tractor from a gas can 100 times. He kept his face away from the hose end and wore goggles we found in a tool chest. That morning, we went back to the balcony where the man had called about his mother. The street had dropped just enough to pull the airboat close to a second-floor landing where the rails were low. The mother was conscious but weak. Renee took a blood pressure reading and checked her airway and pulse. She asked about medications and found an inhaler and pills in a pill box. We moved the woman with a folded sheet like a sling, the 3 of us lifting together in one smooth motion to avoid jostling. We loaded her onto the airboat deck and lashed a chair to stop it sliding. We brought them to the station's office and set up a corner with a clean sheet, water in bottles, and what food we had. When I gave the son a task, washing hands in a pan with treated water before he touched his mother, I saw his shoulders drop in relief. A job is a kind of hope. We kept running the pumps and doing rounds. Every hour we checked the intake grates with poles. Every 2 hours we checked the generator oil and cooled it with a fan when the casing felt too hot for comfort. Renee triaged people who showed up at the gate. A cut foot from stepping on glass, a fever we couldn't be sure about, a child with a cough. We limited who came inside and kept distance. We set a bench outside the door as a talking place, a line we would not cross without need. The bench became our policy written in wood. The looters showed up on the third afternoon, when the water had dropped enough to make front doors visible, and people's eyes were on their rescued photo albums and the pets they had kept on roofs. A pair of small boats with outboards glided across the intersection and stopped 50 feet away, engines idling. 2 men stood in the bows with their hands in their pockets, not hiding the way they watched. One called out in a friendly voice that he was making sure everybody was safe. Slim stood on the roof and called back that we were good, thank you. The man asked if we had any spare fuel. Slim said no. The man asked if we had any batteries. Slim said no again. The man grinned like it was a game. The outboards revved. They circled once and moved on. We followed them with our eyes until they were gone. That night, the radio on the desk in the station office crackled with a new voice. It was thin with the distance, but clear enough to understand. All units, it said. Quarantine perimeters breached. Repeat, New Orleans is lost. If you are able to move, move to higher ground. Baton Rouge staging remains open until further notice. The message repeated. I turned the volume down until it was just a whisper and looked at the others. No one spoke for a long time. We all had known it, and now someone else had said it out loud. We held the station 2 more days. The water dropped until you could see the cobbles in places along Chartres and Decatur. With the pumps running, the quarter began to look like itself in a distorted mirror, still flooded in pockets but with shapes reappearing. The moment you could walk on the dry lane of a street felt like a ceremony. People came out with rakes and brooms and pushed mud toward the gutters. We kept the pumps on until we felt the grounds pull toward dry. On the 4th morning, we heard a high motor and a metal scream that echoed under the Claiborne overpass. I ran to the yard and saw an airboat different from Slim's. A stripped racing hull with a big prop and a driver standing behind a cage. It slid across the yard, scraped a rail, and jammed sideways against the fence. 3 men jumped down. They wore hunting vests and had pistols in holsters and long knives on belts. The driver shouted that they were here to take the generator because their families needed it. He said it like he and I were part of the same plan and I had missed the briefing. Slim stood on the roof with the shotgun held low, not pointing at anyone. Nobody's taken the generator, he said. We got people depending on the pumps. You want help, we help you set up another light tower back at the contractor's lot. You can tow it the way we did. You can take fuel from the same truck we used if there's any left. We'll even give you a hose. The driver looked at him like he was weighing options and time. One of the men raised his pistol a few inches, then lowered it again when he saw the way Slim's eyes didn't blink. Renee stepped up beside me and held her hands out at the shoulder height. Empty. We don't want trouble, she said, steady. We're keeping this quarter from turning into a grave. There are kids on those balconies. There are elders in those rooms. You take this generator and you flood them again. The driver swore softly and looked away, jaw tight. He lowered his head as if deciding to be someone else for a moment. Then he waved his men back. We'll try your yard, he said. If there's nothing left, we're coming back. He meant it as a threat and a promise both. They revved the big prop and left the yard full of ripples. We prepared to leave after that. The pumps had done what they could. Power would not be restored soon. The message on the radio repeated through static that the staging to the north was still open. I knew the levee trails and the high ground routes that kept you above the low bowls of neighborhoods that would take weeks to drain. We made packs out of what we had. Food in dry bags, water in bottles we had treated and sealed, tools wrapped in rags to stop them from clanking. Slim cleaned the Remington and loaded it with shells and a bandolier across his chest. Renee packed the medical kit and taped a small flashlight to a larger one so she could hand one to anyone who needed it without reaching back into her bag. Toby carried a toolbox with spare plugs and hose clamps because he had decided that as long as there were engines, there would be work. Before we shut the station down, I wrote a quick set of instructions in thick marker on a sheet of plywood we found behind the office. I described what we had bypassed, which breakers to throw, where to aim the lights, how to keep the intake clear. I left notes about the diesel fuel in the delivery truck and the siphon hose in the bucket. I told whoever read it to treat anyone with fever as a risk, and to keep the door closed at night no matter who knocked. It felt like writing to myself in another time. We took the river levee west, keeping the high grassy crown under our boots. The city lay to our left, a patchwork of wet and dry, of people on porches and empty streets. To our right, the Mississippi flowed brown and patient, carrying logs and, sometimes, pieces of docks passed with a slow power that ignored the city's drama. The levee path passed under bridges where you could hear the metal groan with leftover wind. We moved in a line with Slim ahead, me behind him, then Renee and Toby. We kept space so one fall would not take us all. We wore gloves, and we did not touch railings or fence posts unless we had to. By the time we reached the back of the French market, we could see groups moving toward the same high ground. Some carried suitcases on their heads. Some pushed carts loaded with water and canned food. A man carried a cat in a laundry basket. A woman had 3 children tied together with light rope so she could stop them with one tug. We made a point of stopping every hour to drink and to look at a map, even if the road was obvious, because that routine kept panic from building in small layers until it tipped over. We used marine VHF to listen for passing boats. One of them was a paddle-wheel tour boat that had broken moorings and then been caught by a crew who chose to make it a platform instead of letting it drift into a bridge. Through the radio, we heard a woman's voice saying she would hold mid-river and receive anyone who reached her by dinghy or from a riverbank where the current was slower. We knew we could not reach her from the levee without a small boat, and we had left ours behind. I made a mental note and put it away. We camped that first night on a section of levee where the grass rose clean and dry. Slim showed us how to set trip lines with the empty cans and stones so anything walking close would rattle. We didn't light a fire, we ate cold food and talked in low voices. I gave everyone a job for the night. Slim first watch until midnight, me until 2, then Toby until 4, with Renee waking at dawn to make sure we all ate something before we moved again. Giving Toby the lonely shift was a test and a gift. He wanted to matter, and he did. Sometime after midnight, the cans rattled twice in a pattern that said wind, not footsteps. Slim stood, one hand on the shotgun and the other cupped to his ear. We all held still and listened. After a minute, we heard the sound that would become part of our lives for a long time. The slow walk of someone who did not use their feet the way a person uses their feet. The toe drag and heel set of someone moving without a plan. It came from the base of the levee. We let it pass. We did not go down to meet it. Patience is a form of defense. We reached the edge of the quarter and the approach to the railroad tracks by late morning the next day. From there, the route to Baton Rouge followed a path that stayed close to the river or climbed to highway shoulders that would be dry. We decided to stop once more at a small station on the way, a place where a handful of pipes crossed a ditch and a panel stood above the high water mark. I knew it from a routine inspection years ago. We could fill water bottles there with cleaner source water than the streets. We treated it and waited. We did not rush, no matter how much our legs wanted to use momentum. Moving slow is hard work. On the third noon, we encountered a unit from National Guard setting up a checkpoint on a section of levee that met a road. They had a Humvee, a radio tent, and plastic barriers. A sergeant told us we could pass after they took temperatures and looked at our hands for cuts. He asked if we had seen any organized groups to the east. We told him about the station and the pumps and the light tower and the men who had come for it. He wrote it down and nodded. "We're trying to get folks to the big road in groups," he said. "We go in and do roof checks when we can. We healers and helpers are tired. We still do it." Renee handed him a list of addresses and short notes on what we had seen. The sergeant read it and looked at her with something like gratitude sharpened by duty. "You coming north?" he asked. "We are," she said, "but we'll stop where we can help. We keep moving, though." He pointed to a table with water bottles and a box of masks. "Take what you can carry," he said. "Keep distance. Don't stop when it's dark. Stick to the top of the levee until you see our next set." We walked on, the city sliding away behind us. When we reached a bend that gave a last view of the quarter, I stopped. The roofs looked like islands surrounded by new shores. The station roof we had used as a watch post was just visible as a flat dot. Somewhere inside, our note hung on a wall, and a pump motor spun under a floor, and water moved along an old channel cut by people who had faced another kind of flood long before us. The thought steadied me. We found trouble again on the edge of town where a siding crossed the levee and there was room to park. A group had gathered under the shade of a live oak with bags and blankets. A man in the group had a deep cut on his forearm from a nail. The cut was red at the edges. Renee cleaned it with treated water and antiseptic and wrapped it with gauze. She told him to keep it dry, to wear a glove, and to walk with the cut held away from his body. She checked his temperature and asked him to stay 50 feet from others until tomorrow. It sounded harsh until you thought about what the alternative would look like on a crowded shoulder at night. He agreed. His wife agreed faster and thanked us twice while looking at the ground. We reached the first staging point outside the city in the late afternoon. A line of people moved through a checkpoint where names were taken and destinations assigned. Buses waited with their windows down. A sign read, "Baton Rouge Shelter Open." Another sign read, "Pets Welcome, Separate Area." I did not know how long either sign would be true, but the existence of signs felt like a promise that rules still worked somewhere. We didn't get on a bus. We chose to keep walking because we had started with that as our method, and methods matter. The guard gave us a map with circled lanes that avoided low places and a list of places to fill water where the source was clean. They gave us a radio channel to monitor for updates. We thanked them and kept to the levee. On our second evening out of the city, we camped near a stand of trees with open sight lines. Slim cleaned the shotgun and kept the shells in a dry bag. Toby took apart a small stove a volunteer had given us at the checkpoint and repaired a leak by tightening a threaded joint with his wrench. He looked satisfied in the way someone looks when they can make heat appear with tools. We ate warm food for the first time since the station. Over the next days, we learned the long rhythm of movement and watchfulness. We met people who wanted to join and people who wanted to go faster alone. We showed some the best way to wrap their feet to avoid blisters. We learned to tie reflective strips to our packs so we could see each other in low light. We learned the weight of silence when you pass a field and hear nothing but wind. On the fifth day, cloud lines built again in the west, and the radio carried a forecast of another band of storms. The message repeated instructions to move away from low ground and to avoid underpasses that could fill with water. We looked at one another, each of us counting the days and the miles. We had come far enough to speak in short pieces and understand. Slim said, "We push a little later tonight. Get past the bend in the ramp." I nodded. Renee tightened a strap on her bag. Toby checked the stove and tightened the cap again. The smallest gesture in a world where small things keep you alive. Before full dark, we heard a voice on the VHF that we recognized from the day on the levee in the city. A woman on a paddle wheel boat. She had made it upriver, she said, and was holding near a safe bank with enough water under her keel. She would take people aboard for the night to keep them off the ground if they could reach her by shore path. She read out a landmark. A rusted barge with a number painted in white that I knew from a survey years ago. It was less than a mile from where we stood. We could see lights through trees, steady and soft. We walked the last mile in a line and came out onto a bank where the river smoothed against the shore. The boat's paddle wheel turned slow to hold position. A ramp lowered with ropes and the hands of people above. We climbed one at a time, hands on rails, boots leaving mud on the planks. On deck, a woman with a captain's cap and a windburned face shook each of our hands and pointed to a spot where we could lay our packs. "We move again at first light," she said, "but tonight you're off the ground." Her voice was not loud and not soft. It was exactly enough. I looked out over the water to the south where the city lay. The clouds were lit from below by a red that was not sunset. I thought of the pump station and the note on the wall, and the intake grates clear for a while, then clogged, then maybe cleared again by someone who had read my handwriting and followed the steps. I thought of the woman with the child on Esplanade and the man reading names into the radio. I thought of the men who had come for the generator and had chosen, for a moment, to be better. Renee stood beside me with her hands on the rail. "You did good work," she said. "You gave the courser time to breathe." "We did it," I said. "You kept people calm. Slim kept the deck clear. Toby kept the engine from dying. We did it together." She nodded. "That's what we carry forward," she said. "Not the fear, not the worst parts. The part where we held a line and made a path." Behind us, Toby had found the engine room and was talking to someone about the generator load and what to watch for if the current shifted. Slim was on the far side of the deck talking to the captain about river bends and drift. I leaned against the rail and let myself feel tired for the first time in days. At dawn, the sky turned the clean gray you get after a front passes. The captain pointed upriver and the boat moved, slow and steady. People on deck held mugs of something warm and watched the shoreline slide. The radio repeated a message that the staging in Baton Rouge was still open and that people should come in groups and follow instructions. I did not know what we would find when we reached it. I knew only that we would arrive with what we had learned. Keep the high ground, keep distance, move water when you can and when you must. Write instructions for the next person. Make trip lines with cans. Give everyone a clear job. Do not open doors at night no matter who knocks. And when you can, use the tools you know to make a small piece of the world work again. By mid-morning, the river narrowed around a bend and the current tugged more firmly at the hull. The captain adjusted throttle and angle. A floating log bumped the side and men with poles eased it away. I saw how their hands turned the poles, how they leaned without thinking, how the boat answered like a well-trained horse. That coordination felt like a promise. We passed under a bridge, and I could hear cars above. They were few, but they were there, and the sound of tires on concrete was a tone I had not heard since the storm. It sounded like people doing what people do when they can. It sounded like the world choosing to work again in its small ways. I stood with our three on the port side and watched the wake. When we reached the staging, I said, "I'll see if they need hands at their pumps. They will, we can help. If they have a station on a bayou that needs clearing, we can go. If they need someone to wire a transfer switch, we have Toby. If they need someone to run triage, we have Renee. If they need someone to keep people calm at night, we have Slim. Slim snorted softly. I keep decks clear, he said. And I make coffee when the pot works. Renee smiled without showing teeth. We keep moving, she said. We help where we can. We don't make promises we can't keep. We rest when we can. We teach what we learned. Toby looked younger than when we met him and older at the same time. I want to go back one day, he said, when it's safer. I want to tune that pump the right way. I want to run it not by jumping wires but proper. You will, I said. We will. The city's not gone. It's resting and angry. It will need hands. We'll bring what we have. We watched the shoreline and the trees and the occasional house on high ground. We ate something warm the chef on board handed out. We made a plan for the day that had the right amount of hope and caution. We kept our gloves handy and our eyes on the water. The captain called down the river that the bend ahead had a cross current and to hold steady. We braced without fear. We had survived the flood and the first days of the outbreak not because we were braver than anyone else, but because we followed rules that made sense, and because we trusted one another with small jobs done well. In a city where water and time try to reclaim every brick, we had done the most human thing. We moved water from where it could kill to where it could flow. We had taken a station full of drowned panels and turned it into a heartbeat for a quarter, long enough for people to step through a door without sinking. We had left instructions, which is another way of saying we believed someone would come after us. We would keep leaving them, all the way up the river, as long as we had ink and cardboard and the will to write. When the radio repeated again that the perimeter had failed and that the city was lost, I turned the volume down and looked ahead. I didn't hear lost. I heard start here. I looked at Renee and Slim and Toby and nodded once to each. We were tired. We were ready. The paddle wheel turned, the river pulled, and the boat held its line. We moved toward a place on the map where the levee was high and the pumps worked and the lights might come on for a few hours at a time. We moved toward a place where a new set of people would need what we knew, and we carried the quarter with us. The streets clearing by inches, the flares, the glow of the light tower in the mist, the sound of a pump motor finding its rhythm and turning fear into a plan. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.